I barely know how to write. I definitely don't know how to read. When I was 330 pounds, I could barely breathe. Powerlifting my way through life. I don't even need a knife. All I need is my fist. All you haters out there, just keep using your wrists. This is Mark Bell from SuperTraining.tv, Super Training Gym, the strongest gym in the West, answering more questions today for the Power Project, brought to you by HowMuchYouBench.net, the Slingshot, and the only freaking strength magazine in the world, the Power Magazine.com, which, by the way, has Eric's photo on the cover of the upcoming issue. So make sure you go subscribe. The question for today is from Justin Clarux. At least I think that's how you say his name, or that's how I want to say his name. And I want to say that he's French, but he may or may not be. I don't know. Anyway, Justin Clarux, he wants to know about bench press and squats. His question on a bench press is, for a raw bencher, how much of an arch would you like to see? His question in the squat is about the hamstrings. He wants to know, why in the heck don't I feel my hamstrings when I squat? Let's answer question number one first. Let's talk about the bench. How much of an arch do I like to see? I don't really care, to be honest with you. I like to see somebody basically pull their chest up and bring their shoulder blades back and down somewhat. And that's really all I'm really looking for when I see somebody do a bench press. I want to make sure that they're not over pressing. They're not shoving the weights too far forward and getting too much strain on the shoulder. I like to basically see that their shoulders are back, that their elbows are in slightly, and that their chest is up. If you can bring your chest up, if you can kind of get yourself on a bench press, and you can grab the bar firmly and have just a slight bend in the elbow. From there, if you can simply just pull your chest up, your rib cage, your sternum, and you can keep all that tight, that's all I'm really looking for in a bench press. Now, I do feel that too many people bench in an overextended position, and I feel that this affects their lockout greatly. What I mean by overextended, flexion is when you are too rounded over, as in when you do a puker squat. You go to do a big squat, and next thing you know, you end up looking at the floor, and it looks like you're throwing up into a toilet. The same thing can happen on a deadlift. Sometimes you end up in that real rounded position. We don't really see that in the bench press. So in the bench press, what we're concerned about, we don't necessarily want just a neutral spine in the bench press, because if you're too neutral in the bench press, then that means your range of motion is going to be too great. But if you're neutral or close to neutral, odds are a lot of times your power is going to be better. Now, this can get very complicated. This doesn't necessarily always mean that this is the best way to do something, because remember what we're trying to achieve with an arch. We're trying to shorten the range of motion. Now, just because your range of motion is shortened doesn't mean that you're in a stronger position. You more than likely will be in a better position. For you big guys out there with bellies that are real thick and that are able to arch up a little bit, 9 times out of 10, I'd say you're fine. You probably don't have much to worry about in terms of how much you arch. There's probably only a certain amount that you can arch anyway. Your mobility is probably somewhat limited due to the muscularity of your back. But there's smaller people, smaller individuals, and women with longer limbs and longer arms. I see it way too often. They're getting taught by these other lifters that feel that, you know, having this great arch is some sort of great thing, or you sometimes see the girl get on the bench and they put their feet down, then they stick their vagina way up in the air. I'm not opposed to that. However, you are bench pressing in an awkward position that's not allowing you, in my opinion, to push as hard as you possibly can with your arms. So always try to keep that in mind. I mean, there's some give and take to each way that you're going to position yourself. A great way to position yourself in a bench press was taught quite a long time ago, I believe by Jim Wendler, maybe Dave Tate, or maybe it was a combination of the two. Maybe they put something up on EliteFTS.com. I can't quite remember. But basically, you lay down on the bench flat to start. Lay back down on the bench flat. Then you set your feet. And you want to have your feet set in a spot that is where you're going to keep them. after that, you're going to then set the upper body. And the way you set the upper body, the way they were teaching, is you have your palms this way and you grab the bar with an underhand grip. And then you pull your body up, physically pull your body up off the bench, and then tuck your shoulder blades into your back pocket. Now again, you don't want to be too overarched or too overextended for those of you that have great mobility. What we're really looking for is that you pull your chest up and that you keep it there throughout the entire range of motion and throughout the lift. So in this case, when you're pulling those, when you pick yourself up off the bench, you're trying to pull your shoulder blades together tightly and downward. It's all we're really looking for. You don't have to overdo the arch. Some of the greatest benchers in the world bench pretty much with a flat back, especially a lot of times in the case of raw, you see that across the board where guys aren't really benching with these huge arches. So those are all things to keep in mind. A real quick tip on foot placement. Normally, for normal circumstances, you're going to want to have your feet under your knees, and you're going to want to have your your leg on a slightly downward grade like this. So let's just say this is your knee down here where my finger is, and let's say up by my wrist is where the hips are. It should kind of, once you get yourself locked in, it should kind of look like that. You should be kind of on a slope, and what that's going to do, coming down from the hip down to the knee, what that's going to do is that's going to raise your belly up, and that's going to raise your chest up. You do not need to really focus in on arching the lower back much, if at all. And wearing a belt can sometimes be wise on a bench press, due to the fact that bench press is probably one of the most taxing exercises on your lower back for numerous reasons. Last little tip on the bench press, make sure you stretch your hip flexors out before you get down on the bench. I think a lot of people don't realize how tight their hips are, and then they end up at the bottom of the bench press. They look like a bug that's getting zapped by a magnifying glass, getting fried by a magnifying glass with the sun. They start to kind of panic, and they let their shoulders kind of roll forward. But if you really look closely, if you look at their legs, everything starts to get initiated from the legs. So there's a couple things to keep in mind at bench press, and let's talk about the squat. Now in the squat, the reason why you're not feeling your hamstrings is because your hamstrings are kind of like passively involved in the squat. Let's just face it, I think it's too overblown about what everyone says about hamstrings and your posterior chain and all these different things. I mean, yeah, of course your hamstrings are involved, and obviously your glutes are heavily involved in the squat, but basically you can do like 10 sets of 10 of stiff leg deadlifts, and the next day you can go in the gym and perform squats and really not have a whole lot of discomfort in your hamstrings. Why is that? Because your hamstrings are somewhat passively involved in the action of a squat. It's more quad and more butt and more just overall your entire body. So it's going to be hard to feel. Some people will say the same thing about a bench. You feel it in your triceps, or some of these things are asinine. These are barbell compound movements, multi-joint movements that take your entire body. They take the use of your entire body. And if you're feeling them in one place, something is wrong. You're not doing the exercise correctly, in my opinion. Even on a box squat, you shouldn't necessarily be feeling your hamstrings. I never had anybody do a box squat and they do like a set of 10. They're like, whoa, my hamstrings are exhausted, as if they did a ton of sled pulling, or as if they did a ton of good mornings or something like that. Your hamstrings are clearly involved, but usually they're more so involved when you're lifting incorrectly. If you go do a squat and you end up in that puker position, as I talked about earlier, you end up craned over, you can potentially pull a hamstring, as I did at one point. So I don't really know why that cue exists or why people talk in those terms, but I'll just tell you flat out right now, it's stupid. There you go. People's coach said it. Put it plain and simple for you. The deeper you go in a squat, it's supposed to kind of activate the hamstrings a little bit more. Does it? I don't really know. Hard to say. Hard to actually feel it, right? Just because there's so many muscles involved. If you're looking into, wanting to bring up your hamstrings, then I would do good mornings and stiff leg deadlifts. If you feel like you don't have the sensation through your glutes and through your lower back and through some of those muscles of the posterior chain during a squat, Maybe there's a slight issue, but again, I doubt it. I would recommend that you do an exercise that I'm a huge fan of, and that's alternating back and forth between a regular deadlift and a stiff leg deadlift, and also doing the same with a good morning and a squat. If you do that on a good morning and a squat, you'll start to feel your hamstrings more. You'll start to learn about where your hips are, where they should be, where they shouldn't be, how to get them lower in the squat, and so on. So, sometimes these cues that you hear from people, telling you to sit way back and some of these different things, they can all be useful tips and useful pointers. But a lot of times, some of these things are coming down from lifters that have been lifting for a very, very long time, and they have a very specific way of saying and doing things. So that's sometimes how things get a little screwed up, and how the terminology gets a little mixed up from time to time. Hopefully those tips help, and that is it from supertraining.tv.